I call her G.I. Jane. She was wearing that tank top and army fatigue. Some cute little tight shorts. A little buff. I said, G.I. Jane. Then after I got talking to her more and noticing she's as much active as me, I said, G.I. Mary Jane. Shit.
Good morning, guys. Happy Monday. I woke up thinking it was Tuesday, so that's kind of weird. It's kind of weird. But regardless, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or the day of the week that doesn't even exist, best thing to do is wake and bake. So that's fun. But no, I didn't just get live here or come live to smoke weed with y'all, although I do like doing that. I just, don't like doing that on certain platforms, Facebook, YouTube, all the ones that censor us to death. But here I am anyway, and to talk about DC, right? So to rewind, when I was in Mississippi, you guys all know 74% of people said yes to medical cannabis. Senate and the governor are blocking it. They are saying that they will pass a bill for Mississippi, but they want to change the language that the people voted on in order to make a THC cap. That's not how this works. The people in Mississippi aren't bending, and I applaud them for that. However, there have been instances in legalization where people have, said, okay, they've made that compromise. And compromise is one thing, but changing a bill so that it disenfranchises retail shops, growers, smokers, that's not okay, right? DC legalized cannabis back in 2014. My mind totally blown. Having grown up in Baltimore, living in Virginia at the time, I couldn't believe that, somewhere that I knew so well. I mean, Baltimore and DC are an hour away. We visited all the time. That now I could go smoke weed legally. Of course, I didn't look into the laws, but we visited DC, and I remember my first joint I sparked up was right out front of the Vietnam Wall, and it felt really good. I felt free, even though I didn't know that I was still breaking a law because I was on federal property. I heard weed was legal, and like everybody else in DC, acted accordingly. But it's not the case. Right? So there's a lot of restrictions in DC. Like, you can't smoke on federal property. I think like somewhere around 80% of DC is considered federal land. So on one side of the sidewalk, it's legal to smoke weed, but on the other side of the sidewalk, you can get hit by the feds and not have a good time, right? Really weird. What else is weird in DC is there's no dispensaries. And that's like, makes your mind just go, it's legal, but I can't buy it. Well, the people in DC are awesome. They're incredible, and they have this flea market style gifting community, because DC says that if I'm allowed to grow weed as a DC resident, I can plant weed in my house. I think the plant count is 6, maybe 12. I'm not 100%, but up to a certain amount, I can grow weed in my house. I am allowed to give that weed to anybody that I want. I can give up to an ounce or maybe 2 ounces. Again, there's a limitation, but I can give, let's just say, an ounce, up to an ounce to somebody, which I've done. I've gone down to DC and sat in a Denny's and, put an ounce on the table for a friend. No money exchanged. Incredible, right? What freedom. However, if for some reason that person at that Denny's had slipped me $5 even, right, had exchanged any amount of money for me giving him that weed, handcuffs, men with guns, cages, you know how the story goes. So it's like, it's been a problem in DC, and I love the freedom because it's letting the home growers actually have a market, because they're not stupid. You buy a pair of socks, right? And you get a free bag of weed. You buy a membership to a cannabis collective and you get free weed when you get in there, right? You donate to somebody's cannabis growing operation, and in exchange you get free weed every month, right? So the people of DC have really gotten around it. The cops were cracking down for years. I remember, and I was very active in this scene, the pop-up scene, the cannabis pop-up scene in DC, through 2017 and 18. And Yeah, it was crazy. Being somebody who was vending then, you'd come in and people would be like, "Hey, can I buy an eighth from you?" And you'd have to be like, "Nope, I don't sell cannabis. I don't sell cannabis, but you can buy this pipe from me, and with this pipe, you get a free eighth of my cannabis that I grow at home." So, as long as you say it the right way, you can get around it. This is ridiculous, though. Like, this is not what legalization looks like. And it's frustrating, right? Because a little old lady is not going to walk into a warehouse in the middle of DC to go get her weed, when it's set up like a rave, which most of them were. Now, since then, some lower key organizations have come out, right, where they actually, you can go to these collectives and not have the party atmosphere, but still have the pop-up experience. Scott Morningstar is watching. He said Capital City Care is a DC dispensary. They have like 3 dispensaries, I think, Scott. Like, there's none in DC. And I bought weed in a DC dispensary. It's disgusting. It's absolutely gross. Ditch weed. It's nasty. Nasty, nasty, nasty. Nope, not going to do it. Meanwhile, you've got home growers that are taking special care and attention and doing what they do. So that was awesome. But in about, I think it was 2017, maybe it was 2018, the Fed got angry that they couldn't catch anybody in DC selling weed because everybody was being very careful with their language. They knew the laws, they knew their rights, and they stuck to them. So what did they do? The feds sent in the FDA, right, the Food and Drug Administration, over food complaints because the edibles weren't packaged properly or the ingredients weren't printed on the side of the label and all these ridiculous regulatory restrictions, so they could arrest people over food non-compliance. They could take their cannabis and any money that they had on site, right? Put them in jail. All these charges generally got dropped or ended up in some sort of fine that you had to pay to the FDA or a cease and desist on your edibles. You don't get your weed back. You don't get your time in jail back. You don't. And this was happening to everybody. And then in 2018, a young lady got pulled over in Frederick with a shit fuck ton of edibles in her car and told the police officer that pulled her over in Maryland that she had just come back from working in DC and it's okay because she sells these there legally. When she said that, Maryland must have called DC. All of a sudden, pop, 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 pop. Everybody started going down. So for 7 years in DC, legalization, consistently, you have people being arrested for petty amounts of weed. Okay? Maybe it's over the 1 or 2 ounce mark, right? But it's definitely not a trafficking level. And even if it were, that's that person's business, as far as I'm concerned. So it's frustrating, right? And it's really frustrating. It's weird because the states that are legalizing now, rather than the states that legalized in the beginning, have much better laws. Like, for instance, in New York State, you can smoke in public and that's okay. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Like Colorado and California, they've had legal weed forever. If New York's smoking in public, can't we just make it so you can smoke in public? Well, see, it's not that easy. Remember Schoolhouse Rock? How a bill gets passed? Cannabis is totally low priority for the federal government. We all know it. Why? I don't know. It literally kills people one way or the other. Millions of people every year. But no, it's not that easy to change laws once they've passed. So don't settle for bunk cannabis bills because it takes 7 years, as we're seeing here in DC. This is why I popped up to speak to you guys today. But cannabisnow.com reported, title, Washington, D.C. Council passes MMJ measure, drops gifting crackdown. Applause, please. Somebody hit the sound effects button. You can hear it in your head. It's okay. Washington, D.C. District Council approved a measure this week to support medical marijuana dispensaries while omitting a proposal that would have cracked down on marijuana gifting and delivery services. Now, those are those pop-ups that I just explained to you that a lot of you on my network are very familiar with, being from the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area. Article goes on. The Washington, D.C. Council on Tuesday unanimously, that means everybody, for the kids in the back, unanimously approved a measure designed to support medical marijuana dispensaries still struggling with the economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic. I haven't heard it called the coronavirus in a while, just COVID, but that's kind of cool. The emergency measure, which extends the expiration date for medical marijuana patient identification cards, was approved without language that had appeared in earlier versions of the legislation, which would have cracked down on so-called marijuana gifting businesses and delivery services. Here's what happened. Right when COVID came through and started shutting everything down, this emergency measure was approved to protect cannabis patients. That was over a year ago, y'all. Almost 2 years in what? February? Isn't that when all this really started, the shutdowns? So right away, some activist, some group, and I don't know who it was. I'm sorry, I'm just reading headlines and skimming at the moment. I'll put the link in the description. Somebody got right on top of it. They got right in front of this. So this is going to be a problem for cannabis patients. Let me write this up. Let me go in and propose this emergency measure. Well, when they did that, clearly somebody else on the higher end said, well, we'll give you what you want, but we want to add this language in. That we crack down on these bad people who aren't paying us our extortion fee to open up a dispensary. These bad people who are gifting cannabis to their community. They're so terrible. It's awful. The level of charity and compassion in the DC cannabis community. Just terrible. I mean, it's dangerous. Clearly dangerous when you have a community that's that compassionate. Obviously, it's why they hung Jesus, right? Nailed him to the cross. It's why they killed him, right? Compassion never dies, though, guys. But whoever entered this bill and heard this negotiation point said no, and it took a year to get what they wanted, but they got it, and without language that was going to go out and intentionally criminalize and incarcerate people who weren't creating victims, who weren't being violent, who were providing life-saving medicine to their community at a price much lower than the dispensaries and a quality much higher. Just terrible. You've got to take those people down, right? Being sarcastic, if you haven't noticed. But the long and short of it is, congrats to whichever group got this through. Under the bill introduced by District Council Chairman Phil Mendelson. Thanks, Phil. Patients with medical marijuana identification cards that expired since March 2020 may continue to use them to purchase cannabis through the end of January 2022. Well, that didn't help them between yesterday and March. But at least there's some progress now. Proposed crackdown on marijuana gifting and delivery dropped. The emergency measure passed by the District Council did not include language to crack down on the cannabis delivery services and marijuana gifting businesses, which include cannabis as a free gift with purchases of a separate item. The items purchased to receive the gift of marijuana generally have little value and have included goods such as stickers and cookies. Under a version of the bill released last week, city agencies would have been empowered to pursue the revocation of licenses, sealing of premises, and fines for businesses purchasing, selling, or exchanging marijuana. So this bill, the original version, said, okay, we'll protect your patients, but only if you let us go out and arrest everybody else. That's what your government does. Keep that in mind when you're at the polls. And don't just go to the polls for the president. That's the least of your worries. Your state representatives are literally writing and controlling what's happening in your state. So focus on that. The D.C. Council wisely voted to help the city's struggling medical marijuana market by extending an emergency bill that allows any patient whose card expired after March continued access to the dispensaries. Tyranny? Come on, that's not his name. Chairman Mendelson's attempt to end access to the Initiative 71 market for all recreational users was ultimately misguided and would have... Oh, wow. Okay, so Mendelson. So Phil, I said thank you, but... Whoa. Not thank you, Phil. Looks like your plan backfired. But I'm glad that there's at least representatives in D.C. that have their eyes on what's going on to the point where they can address this. Let's see. I can't read this close. Carl's watching. Amazing history lesson. This should be archived. Spread the word. It's your freedom that is always under attack. It's true. They take it little by little. Then they give it back to you. Y'all, I was just sitting in Oklahoma, parked in a Walmart, minding my own damn business in this van, and came out to a cop with his flashlight in my window, grilling me over my pipe. In a state that has decriminalized weed, in a state that has legalized medical weed, and I am a medical patient in a different state. However, Oklahoma state law says that in terms of prosecution, they will respect out-of-state licenses. They also respect out-of-state licenses to access the market, provided you pay them a $100 fee, wait 2 weeks, and then they only give you 30 days to access the market. Again, one of those things that they shouldn't have bent on, because it's going to take a really long time to change that. Arizona's the same way. You can't, there's no access. As me, I have a Colorado medical card. I might get an Arizona card. My Colorado one hasn't expired yet, so there's no reason to change. Especially living in a recreational state right now. But my point is, be vigilant, especially on these federal bills. I don't know who watching followed the More Tour through 2020. The More Tour based around the More Act, which was sitting in the floor on the federal level for a vote. The More Act, Marijuana Opportunity and Reinvestment, something like that. The More Act was going to legalize weed, but at a 5% federal tax rate on top of state taxes, with 50% of that 5% collected every year allocated to the Department of Justice so they can go out and arrest my friends for mushrooms in exchange for letting me smoke weed. This is not a good bill. And I was very vocal about it. It didn't pass. I'm not shocked because, again, cannabis is such a low priority on the federal level, and why, I don't know. Millions of people die every year because of not having access to it, or, dying on a life sentence for having too much of it at one time. Pay attention. I'm happy that this DC measure that good old Phil Mendelson tried to sneak in an emergency act was noticed and addressed. But those things aren't always noticed and addressed. And if you don't notice them, if you don't address them, they will be in your legislature forever without change. So you see, it's been 7 years. Nothing's changed. They're still going to try to arrest people, but, they're not doing the extra crackdown, which means things will stay the same. It's better than things getting worse for the cannabis community, but unfortunately, the cannabis community deserves more than it has right now. Not just in DC, but nationally, globally. So, cheers. Here's to patience, compassion. Don't rush them to pass a bill. This community has been smoking weed and staying healthy illegally for generations. We'll be able to keep doing that. So if there's a bill in your state, in your community, if there's a bill that just doesn't have everything in it that you deserve, be patient. It sucks. I know. You want to rush and just, let's get something started. Just any little bit will help. But any little bit will be your only little bit for years, because the legislative process takes that long in most states. For instance, Maryland's had a medical market since 2015, I believe. The doors for the dispensaries didn't open until 2018. And recreational never happened. In the original medical bill in Maryland, patients were supposed to grow. The people who were working on that gave in to the negotiation of, let's not keep the grow, let's take the grow language out of here for now and see how it goes. Years later, nothing's changed. And if you got a half-ass bill and it passes, be prepared for years and years, starting from scratch, trying to change that. Be patient, cannabis community. It's terrible, I know. I'm sick and tired of watching my friends die because of prohibition. I know you are too. Half-ass bills are not going to help us. They're only going to hurt us more. Y'all remember, pass joints, not judgment. I'm going to go on and get on with my day. See you next time. Oh, by the way, make sure you subscribe on Odyssey, because I'm gonna stop doing this Facebook thing. I don't want to give in to their coercion, censorship. It's just not something I'm interested in. So head on over to Odyssey, ODYSEE.com/@GI Mary Jane. And join me, censorship free. We can talk about weed and mushrooms and LSD and anything we want. And Odyssey is not going to delete our videos. I love that. See you next time, kids. I'm the Commander-in-Chief, and I approve this message. Visit platoon420.com today and take the pledge. I will stand tall in the face of tyranny for the best interest of myself and my community. I denounce the archaic drug laws that have made victims of people they were written to protect, and I will not support any legislation that regulates what a person puts in their body.